I spent 7 years of my life pouring everything into NovaForge. 7 years of blood, code, caffeine, and the kind of grit you only discover when you're too far in to quit. There were nights I fell asleep on beanbags under flickering fluorescent lights, waking up to backspace key imprints on my cheek. There were winters I worked through the flu, chugging orange juice between keystrokes. I pitched to VCs in second-hand blazers that smelled like mothballs, using slides held together by duct tape and prayer. And through it all, Celeste was there. Celeste Rowan, my wife, my co-founder, my partner in every sense of the word. Or so I thought. When we closed our Series A, $10 million wired into our account like magic, it felt like we'd finally made it. All those sleepless nights had meant something. All those missed holidays, the late rent, the compromises. We had built something real, and now people were finally seeing it. I remember watching the wire confirmation come through, sitting next to Celeste in our glass-walled office, champagne and paper cups because we couldn't find anything else. We kissed. She called me her genius. I believed her. 2 weeks later, she called me into her new corner office. It didn't hit me at first. She'd always joked about wanting a better view. I knocked, and she waved me in, barely looking up. There were glossy folders on her desk, neatly stacked. I could see my name on one of them. "We're bringing in someone with more experience," she said calmly, each word polished and emotionless like she'd been rehearsing in front of a mirror. "It's best for the company." I blinked. It felt like my ears were underwater. "What do you mean we're bringing in someone?" She pushed one of the folders toward me, the one with my name on it. "It's all there. Severance, stock buyout terms, NDA clauses. Legal reviewed it. You'll be well taken care of." I didn't touch the folder. I just stared at her. This was the woman who used to fall asleep on my shoulder while we debugged servers, who wrote our first pitch email sitting cross-legged on our kitchen floor, laughing at how bad it sounded, who toasted with me when our first hire accepted our offer. "Is this a joke?" I asked. She smiled, a tight, faint thing that didn't reach her eyes. "No joke, love. It's just business. Your name isn't even on the source code," I said, my voice a whisper that scraped against my throat. "You wrote 2 front-end components." She didn't flinch. "I managed the investors, the pitch, the brand. We both contributed. I created NovaForge before it was even an idea on a napkin," I said, my fist clenching without permission. "Every line of the core engine? I wrote it." Her eyes met mine, still cool. "Don't worry," she said softly. "Nobody will remember your contributions anyway." I stood there for a moment, suspended in disbelief. 7 years, reduced to a well-designed severance packet and a fabricated story. I wanted to yell, throw something, cry, maybe. But instead, I did what I had trained myself to do through all those years of pressure, stress, and deadlines. I breathed. Slowly, I picked up the folder. My name looked foreign on it. "Okay," I said, surprising even myself. She blinked. Maybe she expected a scene. Maybe she expected me to beg, or at least slam the door. I didn't. I turned, walked out of her office, walked past the intern I had personally interviewed, past the marketing guy who still had no idea how email automation actually worked, past the break room with the dented coffee machine I'd fixed 3 times. When I reached my desk, the one by the window, not the corner, I shut down my computer, took my favorite coffee mug, took the printed photo tape to my monitor. Me and Alfred Ocone, my old mentor from university, the man who taught me how to think in architecture, not just syntax. It was our photo from the first code jam we won together. He'd signed the back of it, build something they can't erase. I slipped it into my laptop bag. The mug, and my laptop, those were my spoils. No one looked me in the eye as I walked out. Outside, the sun hit differently. Maybe I hadn't really seen it in weeks. Months. I stood there on the curb, holding the life I'd salvaged in a canvas messenger bag, watching cars blur by. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was something else, something deeper, colder. Awake. I didn't slam the office door. I didn't throw the folder back at her or yell in the middle of the bullpen. That would have been for her benefit, not mine. I left NovaForge the way I had built it, quietly, with precision. My laptop, my coffee mug, and that photo of Alfred were all I took. It felt almost ceremonial, stripping my desk down to nothing. 7 years boiled down to a few objects in a bag and the echo of my footsteps on polished concrete floors. Outside, the wind caught my breath before I could find it. The sun glared like it was judging me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the building behind me had already begun erasing my name from every record, every hallway, every memory. But what Celeste didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I never stopped keeping records. That while she pitched and smiled and plotted, I had been building insurance into every line of code, every core module, every access protocol, every security key. NovaForge's backbone, the proprietary identity engine that made our platform bulletproof, wasn't born in that glass office or during our seed funding days. It was born 2 years earlier, on a second-hand laptop in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. I wrote the first version of it between freelance jobs, with a blanket over my shoulders and half a dozen instant ramen cups stacked beside me. I'd even named it Othello. It had lived in a private Git repository long before NovaForge ever existed. And 2 months before Celeste's little boardroom coup, my attorney, Harper Jean, had already documented every line of its origin. Back then, I wasn't paranoid. I was meticulous. I knew founders screwed founders sometimes, and I never expected to be immune to betrayal just because I wore a wedding band. Harper helped me log timestamps, sign affidavits, and back up everything 3 different ways, including to a dead-drop server only she could access. At the time, she called me cautious. Now, she'd probably call me prophetic. I went home and didn't speak. Not to anyone. Not at first. I just sat in the silence of my apartment, an apartment I never had time to decorate, and stared at the dark screen of my laptop like it owed me an explanation. Eventually, I turned it on, logged into my private repo, pulled up the first commit message, initial build of Othello engine, secure identity mapping v1. The timestamp was as clear as ever. So was the metadata. It made me feel oddly calm. What I didn't feel was angry. Not yet. There was still too much numbness. Too much mental static from what had happened. I spent the next few days off the radar. I didn't respond to the inevitable messages that would start to roll in once people noticed I was gone. I didn't post anything online. I didn't rage tweet or write a Medium post detailing my exit. I didn't want pity. I didn't want applause. I wanted clarity. And I needed space to feel the full weight of what had happened without it crushing me. Eventually, I got out of town, packed a bag, hopped a train, and rode until the city blurred behind me. I landed in a place that smelled like pine and distant rain, checked into a no-frills motel, and let the days bleed into each other. I walked trails. I read books that had nothing to do with code or startups or productivity hacks. I listened to jazz and ate food that didn't come in a takeout box. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake up thinking about user acquisition or burn rates or sprint goals. The detox was unplanned, but it was perfect. I ended up speaking at 2 small development conferences, nothing flashy. Just a few passionate engineers gathering to swap war stories and share code. No corporate suits. No press. I gave a talk about system resilience and architecture philosophies, and afterward, a few folks asked if I was that guy from NovaForge. I smiled and said I used to be. Their recognition didn't sting. It just reminded me that I had a name before the company. I could have one after. Later, I started taking calls quietly, selectively. 3 different competitors of NovaForge reached out, all under the radar, asked me for my thoughts, consulted me on architecture challenges. I didn't volunteer anything, just listened, advised, sent invoices. It was enough to keep my mind moving, to remind myself of my own value. Then, about 2 months in, I got a call from Julius. Julius had been one of the back-end engineers I mentored. He was young, brilliant in his own right, but not seasoned. When I picked up the phone and heard his voice, I already knew something was wrong. Hey, the system's crashing, he said, voice jittery. I leaned back. Crashing how? They're calling it a back-end refactor, but everything's breaking. Users can't log in. APIs are timing out. They're scrambling. Did you check the architecture archive? I asked, already knowing the answer. There was a pause. I could hear him clicking. The what? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. Exactly, I murmured. The silence on the other end spoke louder than any apology ever could. After the call with Julius, I didn't reach out to anyone else. I didn't gloat. I didn't so much as send a smug emoji. I just went quiet. It wasn't about hiding. It was about watching, listening, letting things break the way they were always bound to when built on shaky foundations and shallow knowledge. Celeste and her shiny new CTO, Merrick Sloan, were busy touring the tech circuit like celebrities. They grinned from stages with NovaForge's logo lit up behind them like a beacon of false promise. They talked about scalability, innovation, and a new era for the company, all while wearing sleek black suits and curated confidence. I watched a few clips online. Merrick said things like, "We've reimagined the backend for next-gen performance," which translated roughly to, "We've patched together code we don't fully understand." I didn't watch for long. Their act was polished but hollow. So I unplugged instead. I kept my ear to the ground but let my face disappear. I traveled more. Wandered into towns where nobody knew my name and no one cared what a founder was. I consulted with companies that still built things because they believed in the work, not because they wanted their logos and TechCrunch. I stayed busy, deliberately, not out of spite but out of preservation. Because if I thought too long about what had been taken from me, I might lose my edge, my calm. And if I was going to do anything about it, I needed to stay sharp. 2 months passed. Then, the call came. "Hey," Julius said, his voice tight with something between panic and exhaustion. "The system's crashing." He didn't have to say more. I could already picture the fire. NovaForge had never been built to scale the way it was being pushed now, at least not without someone who understood the underlying architecture. Which, as it turned out, Merrick didn't. I leaned against my kitchen counter and asked calmly, "Did you check the architecture archive?" There was a long pause. I could hear him clicking through files. The what? Exactly. That archive wasn't just a random folder. It was a comprehensive directory I'd created as part of our original internal documentation. It contained flowcharts, dependency maps, legacy notes, failover protocols, a goldmine for anyone trying to maintain or build on the system. But of course, when Celeste and Merrick took over, they decided to clean house. Streamline, they called it. What they actually did was discard the original framework like an old jacket, not realizing the new code had holes in every seam. "I'll be honest, Julius," I said, not cruelly but truthfully, "you're in for a rough ride." "They're saying it's a refactor," he muttered. "But they don't even know what they're fixing. Everything's duct-taped. The user auth module?" Merrick replaced half the calls and now nobody can log in. That part hit me. Othello, the identity engine I wrote, was never meant to be rewritten by someone who didn't understand its logic trees. You couldn't just swap out components and expect stability. It was like yanking wires from a bomb without knowing which one would blow. "Look," I said, "I can't get involved. Not officially." "I know," he said quickly. "I just thought." "I don't know. You should hear it." After we hung up, I sat in the silence again, this time different. This wasn't numbness. This was clarity. NovaForge had cut me out like a tumor, and now the body was rejecting the transplant. And the worst part was, this didn't surprise me. Celeste was brilliant, yes, but not in code, not in systems. Her brilliance was in optics, narrative, persuasion. But tech wasn't something you could manipulate with a smirk and a PR statement. I opened my laptop, not out of nostalgia, out of curiosity. I checked their deployment logs, or rather, what I could still publicly access. It was bad. Downtime creeping up week by week. Client reports showing increased latency. One particularly nasty customer review complaining that their integration failed mid-demo and cost them a sale. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cheer. I just noted it. Filed it away. Like a chess player watching an opponent make the first few sloppy moves. Over the next week, 2 more back-end engineers reached out. Then a support lead. Then a product manager who didn't even realize I was no longer part of the team. It was happening slowly, but it was happening. The walls were cracking. And not because I pulled any strings. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't have to. The system was never meant to be run by people who didn't understand its spine. I started tracking everything. Quietly. Dates. Emails. Bug reports. Phrases like, "We don't know why this is failing," and "awaiting clarification from leadership." I took screenshots. Recorded logs. Not for revenge. For proof. Celeste might have taken the company. But I had the blueprint. And the thing about blueprints is, they're the difference between a building and a ruin. The phone started ringing in bursts, first like distant thunder, then like a storm that wouldn't stop. It began with Julius again. He called late at night, voice anxious, cracking through static like he hadn't slept in days. "They're trying to rebuild the modules," he said. "But they don't know where to start. Merrick thinks he can brute force a new solution, but the whole structure keeps collapsing." I listened without offering help. Not because I enjoyed watching the struggle, I didn't. I had poured my soul into that code base, and watching it falter felt like watching someone tear down your childhood home with a sledgehammer. But I had already been cut out. Fired by the woman I trusted most. My name stripped from the deck, my work rebranded as someone else's. I owed them nothing. Then Merrick left me a voicemail. The irony nearly choked me. "Hey man. I know things ended weird, but I think we might need your insight on a few things. Just some questions about the old backend. It won't take long. Would really appreciate it." He sounded exhausted. No arrogance in his voice this time. Just desperation buried under forced calm. I didn't return the call. Then came Celeste. Her number lit up my screen in a flash of familiarity I hated. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. Then it started again. And again. She eventually left a message, her tone deceptively casual, as though she hadn't orchestrated my erasure just weeks before. "Hey, just wondering if you could hop on a quick call. Merrick's stuck on something. Just a few questions. Nothing serious. Nothing serious." Like my 7 years of work had been a casual hobby. Like kicking me out of the company we built didn't come with permanent consequences. I didn't call her back either. Instead, I called Harper. She picked up immediately, her voice clipped and alert, like she was expecting me. "They're cracking, aren't they?" "They're calling," I said simply. "Good," she replied. "We don't answer. Not yet. The more they squirm, the more leverage we gain." And that became the rule. We did nothing. At least, nothing visible. I continued to document everything. Saved the voicemails. Noted the timestamps. Tracked every outage and client complaint posted online. NovaForge's uptime began to nosedive. Their average response times doubled. Some of their most high-profile clients, the kind Allegra Trask bragged about during the Series A pitch, started to publicly raise concerns about stability. In the tech world, nothing dies faster than credibility. Articles started popping up. Quiet ones at first, from smaller blogs. Is NovaForge scaling too fast? Behind the curtain, is their identity tech as reliable as claimed? I read every word and stayed invisible. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt focused. Weeks passed. More calls. More voicemails. Even Merrick emailed me directly once, subject line, "Let's talk." I forwarded it to Harper, who responded with a single sentence, "They're begging now." Then one morning, an encrypted email arrived in my inbox. It was from Harper, short and razor-sharp. Subject, "Ready to go nuclear?" I stared at those 6 words and felt the tension I'd been carrying shift. Not lift, not yet, but shift. I called her. She answered on the first ring. "They're lying to the board," she said before I could even speak. "We've got confirmation from a source close to Zephyr Capital. Celeste is claiming she built the identity engine, and you were just her tech support. She says your departure was mutual and that you never contributed anything critical to the system's foundation." I should have been angry. But I wasn't. Anger felt too small. Instead, I felt something colder. Cleaner. Like steel being tempered. "Then it's time," I said. Harper's tone sharpened. "You still have the leverage file?" Of course. The file wasn't a threat. It wasn't even about vengeance. It was truth. And truth, when wielded properly, can be more powerful than any revenge plot. Inside the file were all the receipts. The earliest timestamps of the core modules created months before NovaForge's incorporation, screenshots of prototype builds dated in my name, old emails with Celeste where I clearly documented my intentions to bring my work into the company. There were contracts, metadata, encrypted backups, an airtight chain of custody. We had waited long enough. Let them build their tower on top of my foundation. Let them forget where the first stone came from. Now the cracks were showing, and I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. I just had to speak at the right time. And that time had arrived. Harper's office was all clean lines and soft light, the kind of space designed to make people underestimate just how sharp she was. I sat across from her at the long walnut table, the weight of the encrypted drive in my palm like a heartbeat. I didn't rush to hand it over. Not because I was hesitant, but because it felt like the final turn of a key in a long, locked door. Once I slid it across the table, there would be no stepping back. This wasn't about old code anymore. This was legacy, memory, proof. She plugged the drive in with a clinical ease, her fingers moving across her keyboard like a pianist. "Let's walk through it one more time," she said, her eyes scanning the screen as files began to decrypt. Timestamps, architecture notes, source commits, and emails with Celeste, I added, back from when we were still working out of the apartment. I told her point blank I was integrating Othello into the prototype. She replied, "We'd be dead without it." Her words. Harper gave a low whistle. Poetry. She opened the next folder, labeled Foundation. Inside were side-by-side comparisons of the current NovaForge infrastructure and my original engine. Even stripped down, the skeletons matched. Line for line, the bones were mine. She clicked through modules, commit logs, legal documents, each piece locking into place like the mechanism of a carefully forged weapon. "This isn't just leverage," she said, her voice quieter now, reverent almost. "This is the entire foundation. You didn't just contribute. You built the engine they're driving. They took your code, rewired it badly, and called it progress." I nodded. It was never about being CEO. I just wanted the truth intact. Harper looked up at me then, and there was a rare softness behind her usual lawyer's armor. "You don't need to be angry to take back what's yours," she said. "But you do need to be precise. And you've done that." She copied a few of the key documents to her own secure vault, double-checking the encryption. "We'll lead with the independent creation," she said. "You had a working prototype with full architecture before NovaForge ever existed. Then we follow with the email chain that confirms Celeste knew and agreed you brought Othello in. Finally, we show their recent breakdowns, the crashes, the failed refactors, and prove that everything they're still using traces back to your original code. Let them try to deny it," I said quietly. "They won't," Harper said. "Not when they see this. Not when the board sees this." I stared out the office window, watching the city buzz below, the skyline sharp against the overcast sky. I wasn't fantasizing about revenge. I wasn't picturing Celeste's reaction or Merrick's panic. What I felt was deeper, more final. For years, I'd lived with the weight of building something from nothing, of believing that if you worked hard enough, stayed honest, put the hours in, people would respect that. But people forget. Or worse, they pretend to. Celeste hadn't just betrayed me as a co-founder. She'd rewritten the story and shoved me out of the frame. But now I had the receipts. "You ready to be remembered?" Harper asked, standing. I stood too. "Not remembered," I said. "Just restored." She smiled. "Let's make sure the record is permanent." We parted with a simple nod, no dramatics. I left her office with my hands empty but my footing firm. The drive was in her possession now, but the proof? The proof had always been in the work. On the way home, I passed a billboard with the NovaForge logo on it. Tagline: "Redefining Identity." I almost laughed. The irony was almost elegant. By the time I got back to my apartment, I already had an email from Harper titled Phase 1, Initiated. Attached was a list of board contacts, timestamps of sent disclosures, and a copy of the summary memo we'd prepared. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I sat down, pulled up that old photo of Alfred and me, the one I'd taken from my desk the day Celeste fired me. I looked at our grins, all idealism and caffeine, and whispered, "They'll remember now." Not because I shouted, not because I fought dirty, but because truth, when you hold on to it long enough, becomes undeniable. And I was done being erased. It had been 6 months since Celeste handed me that severance packet like a polite execution. 6 months since I walked out of NovaForge with nothing but a laptop, a mug, and a promise to myself that I wouldn't be forgotten. I kept my head down. I didn't take to social media. I didn't leak anything to the press. I let the silence work in my favor. And now, that silence had brought someone unexpected to my front door. Allegra Trask. She stood there in a slate gray trench coat, hair tied back, no assistants, no dramatics. Just her, a face I recognized from boardroom slide decks and investor dinners, though we'd never spoken more than a few sentences. She was the one who brought Zephyr Capital's check to our Series A round, the one who gave us 10 million reasons to believe we'd made it. She had also stood behind Celeste on that announcement call, nodding like the future was something they already owned. Now, she looked at me like someone who'd been chasing smoke and just found the fire. "May I come in?" she asked. I held the door open and said nothing. She didn't waste time. The second she stepped inside, she went straight to the point. We were sold a lie. I didn't move. Just watched her. Her gaze was sharp but not hostile. More like a detective piecing together the final clue. She walked to my kitchen island and placed a thin folder on the counter. "Celeste claimed she built the authentication engine. She told us you were the technical implementer, that she was the architect." "Of course she did," I said, finally. Allegra opened the folder. "The system's collapsing. Clients are leaving. And Merrick." She shook her head. "He's in over his head. They brought in an outside consultant last week to try to patch things. He quit in 3 days." I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just waited. She pulled out a printout from Harper's memo, the one we'd sent to the board 2 days ago. The one with the code timestamps, the repo logs, and the emails that proved I'd built the system from the ground up. "This changes everything," she said. "If what's in here is accurate." "It is," I said. "Every line, every date, Every word. Allegra nodded slowly. You have something they need. More than that, you are something they need. Nova Forge is burning, and the fire started when they decided they didn't need the architect anymore. I leaned against the counter. So why are you here? She looked me dead in the eye. Because I want you to come to the emergency board meeting tomorrow and tell your side of the story. I didn't answer right away. My mind raced through the possible outcomes. But one thing cut through all the noise. This was the moment I had been waiting for, not to hurt Celeste, but to reclaim the truth. To plant it back in the ground they tried to salt over. I'll call my attorney, I said. Allegra reached into her coat and pulled out a business card. I'll see you at 10. After she left, I sat in the silence she disrupted. The space around me felt different now, charged. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a man on the outside. I felt like the fulcrum, the one the whole weight was about to pivot on. I called Harper. She answered with her usual confidence. She came to you? Harper asked. Allegra herself, I said. She wants me to speak to the board. There was a brief silence, and then, we're going. Harper didn't ask if I was ready. She knew. This wasn't about whether I wanted to walk back into Nova Forge. This was about whether I'd let someone else keep writing my story. I'll prep the presentation, I said. I've already got the deck from the original prototype pitch. The one with Othello on slide 14. Perfect, she replied. We don't need a scorched earth approach. Just truth. That's enough to knock the foundation out from under them. As I opened my laptop and pulled up the files, I felt a calm roll over me. Not relief, not yet, but purpose. For months, I'd let them talk. Let them build a version of reality without me in it. Tomorrow, I'd step back into the room I had built, and I would remind them that nothing about Nova Forge existed without me. They wanted my silence. What they'd get instead was the record. Walking back into Nova Forge was like stepping into a distorted mirror of my own past. Everything looked familiar on the surface, the polished floors, the flicker of monitors through glass-walled conference rooms, the quiet hum of innovation and motion, but it felt different. Off. Like someone had rearranged the furniture in a dream. I moved through the front doors without a badge, escorted by security per protocol, but the receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. She remembered. I could tell by the way her gaze flicked between me and the visitor badge like it didn't make sense. Harper walked beside me, every step a deliberate strike. Her calm was a weapon all its own. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I was listening to the way the air felt heavier than I remembered, the way silence followed us down the hallway like a shadow. We passed a few employees I used to work with, engineers, designers, product leads. They glanced up, did double takes, and quickly looked away. Like seeing a ghost. I suppose that's what I was to them. The ghost in the code. We reached the boardroom. The door was already open. Allegra stood inside, speaking quietly to a few people around the table. She looked up when she saw me, nodded once, and gestured toward the seat at the end of the table. Not the one by the coffee, not a side chair, that seat. The one meant for the person who knew what they were doing. Celeste sat on the opposite end, spine straight, expression unreadable. Her blazer was crisp, her hair pulled back in that precise, careful way she always wore it when she wanted to look unshakable. But her eyes betrayed her. There was tension there. A flicker of something she couldn't contain. Merrick sat beside her, paler than I remembered. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, which made sense given the state of the system. I sat down slowly, deliberately, took out my laptop, plugged in the USB drive Harper had prepared. The screen came to life on the main display at the front of the room, casting a soft blue glow across the table. Harper remained standing. My client, she began smoothly, retains full intellectual property rights to the foundational code your current product cannot function without. We've documented every piece. Creation dates, source commits, original architecture documents, and email confirmations from Celeste Rowan acknowledging the integration of Othello into Nova Forge prior to its formation as a company. She clicked once. A slide appeared. Othello architecture, initial build, 18 months before incorporation. The timestamps glowed like lit fuses. I watched the board members lean in. Click. Email, Celeste Rowan. Subject, we'd be dead without it. Click. Slide 14. Original pitch deck, core identity engine overview. I didn't say anything. I let the receipts speak. Let the architecture charts, the side-by-side comparison of current Nova Forge systems and my original prototype, do all the talking. I could feel the shift in the room, the subtle tilt of perception recalibrating as they digested the undeniable. Merrick wouldn't meet my eyes. Celeste's face was pale, but still composed. Then something happened I didn't expect. Julius. He was standing near the back of the room. I hadn't even seen him enter. His voice cut through the heavy air. Without his code, Julius said, his voice clear, we don't have a platform. Not now. Not ever. We've been duct taping a system we barely understand. And every time we try to move forward, we crash into architecture none of us built. There was a beat of silence. The kind that doesn't just fall, it lands. One of the board members, a man in a navy suit with steel gray hair, cleared his throat. So what exactly are we running on? My code, I said, looking directly at him. Built before NovaForge existed. Documented, proven, and manipulated without my consent. Allegra looked toward Celeste. Care to respond? Celeste sat very still. The company was built by both of us, she said, each word precise. We were partners. I believed we were moving forward with a shared vision. You removed me, I replied evenly, and tried to erase me. I made a decision for the company, she said. No, I said. You made a decision for yourself. Harper interjected. We're not here for character debates. We're here for facts. And the facts are, this product cannot survive without licensing the engine from its original creator. You can either acknowledge that and negotiate accordingly, or continue to bleed out your client base until there's nothing left to defend. It was done. The board had what it needed. I packed my laptop as quietly as I had arrived. They wanted to forget me, but I had never forgotten the code that made all of this possible. And now, neither would they. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within 24 hours of the board meeting, the press release dropped. NovaForge announces leadership restructure. The language was typical corporate fluff, vision realignment, new chapter, continued commitment to innovation. But behind the curtain, the truth was blunt. Celeste was removed as CEO. Merrick was gone without even a farewell statement. Just two names quietly erased from the masthead, replaced by placeholders and silence. The next day, Allegra called. We're offering you the CTO position, she said without hesitation. Your founder's equity will be reinstated at original valuation. We're also prepared to issue a royalty license for continued use of the identity engine, retroactive to your severance. And the board will draft a formal acknowledgement of your foundational contributions. I didn't speak right away. Not because I was uncertain, but because the moment was so surreal I had to take a breath and feel it in my bones. Harper, who was sitting across from me at her office table, arched an eyebrow like she already knew what I'd say. It's more than we hoped, she said calmly. I nodded once. It's exactly what's right. They weren't doing me a favor. They were righting a wrong. And it wasn't just about paperwork or power. It was about restoration. About putting things back where they belonged. It would take time for the world to know the truth, but within that boardroom, it was already gospel. Later that evening, NovaForge held a closed-door meeting with the remaining leadership and key investors. I wasn't required to attend. It was mostly internal damage control, but I watched the stream from Harper's laptop as she took notes beside me. They used my name, my architecture, my title. There was no hesitation anymore. The revisionist history Celeste had carefully sculpted shattered on impact, and no one dared pick up the shards. And yet, as satisfying as it should have been, there was no celebration in me. Just a quiet, grounded resolve. I wasn't back to prove anyone wrong. I was back to build something right. That night, I returned to the NovaForge office for the first time as its CTO. I used my new access badge to step through the front doors alone, after hours, when the lights were dim and the halls empty. I didn't want applause. I didn't want some awkward welcome party. I just wanted to see the place again on my own terms. The walls hadn't changed, but everything felt cleaner somehow. Honest. As I stood outside what had once been Celeste's corner office, I paused. The room was dark. Her nameplate was gone. Inside, the desk was cleared, waiting. I opened the door, walked in, and turned on the light. The city glowed behind the glass, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel shut out. I felt returned. I sat at the desk. Let my hands rest on the surface. The silence was heavy but good, like the deep breath before something new begins. Then I heard footsteps. Celeste. She appeared at the door like she'd been standing outside for longer than she wanted to admit. She didn't look composed this time. No armor. Just a woman who had watched something she thought she controlled slip between her fingers. I wasn't sure if you'd be here, she said quietly. I didn't stand. I work here. A faint smile tugged at her lips, sad and tired. You rebuilt everything, she said. I didn't see it coming. No, I said. You didn't want to. She stepped inside but kept her distance. Was this all just revenge? The question didn't sting. It was too late for that. I met her eyes. No, this is the receipt. Celeste nodded once, slowly, like she understood that sentence more than anything else I could have said. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. I used to believe in us, she said softly. In what we built. We could have built more, I replied. But you chose to cut me out. She didn't argue. She just walked away. I stayed in that office for a long while after she left. Let the weight of it all settle. I thought about the early days, the beanbags, the whiteboards covered in sketches, the ramen-fueled coding sprints, the nights when she fell asleep beside me as I debugged into the sunrise. It wasn't all betrayal. Some of it was real. But real things don't survive lies. Now, at least, the truth had a seat at the table again. And I was sitting in it. I didn't throw a party. There was no press tour, no victory lap, no triumphant return tweet. I came back quietly and did what I had always done best, build. Not for credit, not for optics, but because the code still mattered and someone had to make it whole again. The first week back as CTO was chaos. The stack was a mess. Half-documented patches, sloppy refactors, API endpoints changed without notation, and error logs that looked like digital screams. The backend was limping on duct tape and denial. Merrick had left things worse than I expected, but it didn't surprise me. That's what happens when the foundation is misunderstood and the builders mistake showmanship for substance. So I rolled up my sleeves. Literally. Most nights I worked past midnight, elbows deep in code, rebuilding what I once designed in quiet solitude. I didn't delegate. Not at first. I needed to see the breakage for myself. Feel where the fractures had spread. I reread my own architecture notes and watched in dismay at how many of the core modules had been mutilated to fit someone else's vision of scalability. And when I started hiring again, I chose with surgical precision. Julius was my first call. He didn't hesitate. I never wanted to leave, he said. Just didn't know how to stay. Now you do, I told him. He came back 2 days later, and when he walked through the office, there was something different in his step. Confidence. Ownership. The kind that only comes when your loyalty is finally matched by leadership that listens. From there, I rebuilt the team. Quiet talent, overlooked voices. Engineers who didn't want to chase the spotlight, but wanted to chase the problem. We worked in small pods, writing everything down, documenting every decision. There were no silent decisions anymore, no undocumented tweaks or shortcuts. I made documentation mandatory and led by example. Every diagram, every logic tree, every caveat, I wrote them all down like I was carving history into stone. And slowly, the company began to stabilize. Uptime returned to baseline, then exceeded it. Customer tickets dropped. Clients who had nearly walked returned, cautiously at first, then with growing trust. It wasn't just about fixing bugs, it was about restoring belief. One morning, I walked past the server ops room and heard laughter. Real laughter. Julius and one of the newer hires were joking about an old piece of legacy code they'd finally replaced. I paused outside the door and listened, not because I needed credit, but because the heartbeat of the company was coming back. Steady. Alive. Allegra stopped by that afternoon. She didn't need to. Investors rarely come down from the mountain once things settle, but she made a point of visiting. I met her in the break room, where the coffee machine still made a horrible clanking noise I hadn't gotten around to fixing. I've read the reports, she said, handing me a printout. Performance is up 20%. Downtime at record low. Clients are calling you the silent architect. I smiled faintly. Not silent anymore. She studied me for a second, then nodded. I underestimated you. You weren't the only one, I said, sipping my coffee. She leaned against the counter. You could have burned it all down, you know. After what they did. A few interviews, a data leak, even just one social post, you could have made them bleed. That's not what this was ever about, I said. I wasn't here to destroy NovaForge. I was here to save what mattered. And I meant it. The betrayal still sat in my history like a scar, but it didn't own me. Celeste's decisions would always be a fracture in the origin story, but they weren't the story. The real story was what survived. What was rebuilt? What was reclaimed? I went back to my desk after she left, the old photo of me and Alfred now framed beside my monitor. I looked at it often, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder, built something they can't erase. And I had. NovaForge wasn't just back on its feet. It was standing taller than ever. Because now it was honest, documented, understood. and I was no longer the ghost in the code. I was the architect at the helm. It was a quiet night when the email arrived. I was alone in my apartment, sipping a lukewarm coffee, eyes skimming over the latest performance metrics. We just closed a partnership deal with a major fintech client, and the platform had handled the onboarding without so much as a hiccup. It was the kind of milestone I used to dream about during all-nighters, back when NovaForge was nothing but hope wrapped in syntax. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was in the glow of a screen, working like always. Then the notification pinged. From Celeste Rowan. Subject: you were right. My finger hovered over the mouse, not clicking, just waiting. I stared at her name like it didn't belong there. It had been months since I'd last seen her in person, since she walked away from the corner office that had once been mine and hers and no one else's. Since her version of the truth unraveled in front of a room full of people who finally saw the blueprint. I clicked. I should have stood beside you instead of above you. NovaForge was always your vision. I let ego and power blind me. I hope one day you'll forgive me. I'm sorry. The cursor blinked at the end of the message like it was waiting for my next breath. Forgiveness. I leaned back in my chair. The city blinked through the window behind me, lights like static in the distance. For a moment, I closed my eyes and tried to remember what it felt like before everything fractured. When she was the first person I pitched ideas to, when we scribbled concepts on pizza boxes and toasted cheap wine over every line of functioning code. Back then, her laughter was real, and her belief in me didn't feel like strategy. But that version of us was buried now, under boardrooms, betrayal, and silence. Still, her message wasn't performative. It wasn't calculated. I knew Celeste too well. If she wanted to manipulate, she'd have done it differently. This wasn't her trying to claw back control. This was her letting go. I reread it once more, then placed my hands on the keyboard and typed. I don't need an apology to move forward. But I'll take the truth. I hit send. No dramatic flourish. No grand statement. Just a quiet return of honesty to a place that had once known so little of it. Then I closed the laptop. I stood, stretched, and walked to the balcony, letting the night air hit me full in the chest. The city was alive in that quiet way it only gets at midnight, like everything dangerous and beautiful is holding its breath. I looked down at the street, at the cars passing like currents in a river, and let myself breathe in the stillness. This was it. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just peace. The kind you don't get from winning, but from surviving the worst of it without losing yourself. NovaForge was stable. My name was restored. The team was thriving. Julius had just gotten promoted to lead systems architect, and the younger engineers looked to him the way he once looked to me. Harper had accepted a board seat, ensuring the legal scaffolding we rebuilt wouldn't be torn down by ego again. Allegra had even hinted at a new round of funding, though this time, I wasn't chasing capital, I was choosing clarity. My legacy was intact, but more importantly, I had mine back. Not just the company, not just the title, myself. The version of me that knew what it meant to build something for real, to bleed into code and shape it into something that lived in the world, to be the kind of leader who didn't need to raise his voice because the work spoke louder. I stood there on the balcony until the wind softened and the hum of the city dulled to a heartbeat. Then I walked back inside, turned off the lights, and left the screen behind. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of being erased. I wasn't chasing the past. I was free.